Welcome back to the podcast where we explore the creator economy and how you can succeed in it. Our guest today is Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. Now, Gordon has been in the entertainment and media industry for about 30 or so years, maybe even a little bit longer, as he would say, advising and representing creators and creative businesses on how to effectively share their messages to make an impact and spread their influence without undue risk or liability. Gordon, pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks, Jake. It's great to be here.
I have so many questions, but I want to start with Gordon. Why do you love the entertainment and media space? What drew you to it?
You know, I got attached to the entertainment industry at a very young age. I was about 5 years old, kindergarten. I went to a K through 12 school, and the high school kids were doing a production of Oliver. And the kindergarten class, they took us into to see the production, the rehearsal. And when those lights went on and the curtain went up and the sound and the music, I got hooked and I never let go. And I got attached to theater and then moved into radio, TV, and film when I was in college. And I just love the medium. I love the getting the message out, the impact you can have with these powerful tools. But ultimately, it's the people, the creative energy that people bring to doing this stuff really excites me and invigorates me. And I just, I never had the talent to be the on-camera guy. Well, I mean, here I am on camera, but, I always want to be a part of it. So I apply my aptitudes and help folks with the business and the legal side of things so they can be safe. And that allows them to be bold and really get that stuff out there.
So where did your background sort of lead you into becoming the podcast lawyer, just for reference to creators, creative professionals listening to the show?
Well, as I said, in college, I was studying radio, TV, and film, and I came out of college in the late 1980s with an expectation I was going to be in the film and television business, and I worked in that industry briefly. I had actually discovered this aptitude for the legal and business side of things while still in college. I'd sort of finished all the work in my major as a television production guy. And so I did some of the graduate level classes in public policy and management and media and government regulation of the media and things like that. And I excelled at it to the point where the professor who taught those classes pulled me aside and said, "You should think about going to law school." And I laughed at the notion of it at the time. Cut to a couple of years later, I'm working in the Hollywood, film and TV industry, and the writers went on strike. And it's kind of echoes to the past of what's going on in Hollywood this year. But writers went on strike, and I was without work. So I thought, well, what can I do? Maybe now's a good time to go to law school. And it was. So after graduating, I worked briefly for a small law firm that did entertainment media litigation, and didn't love the litigation part of it very much. So I quickly went out on my own, hung out a shingle, and started helping the kinds of people I love to spend time with, the creative folks.
Yeah. And did you ever have any other names that didn't quite make the cut before you settled on the podcast lawyer? Or was that just the one that went, yep, that's for me?
Yeah. That kind of branding is the kind of thing that I don't know of any other lawyers who have put the subject matter lawyer together in sequence, but I actually had done the theater lawyer a while back before I started doing podcast lawyer. And that one has stuck too. So depending on who I'm talking to, I'm the theater lawyer, I'm the podcast lawyer, I'm the documentary lawyer, I'm the independent film lawyer. But the podcast lawyer is the one that trips off the tongue the best and really represents who I like to serve these days.
Well, I must say, when I was reading your bio, I was like, the podcast lawyer, that is so cool. I was a little bit envious. I was like, that is such a cool name. Not that I'll ever get into that side of things. I'm just like, that is, I really, it's a big thumbs up for me. I love it so much.
Well, have you ever heard the book, The Story Brand?
No.
So it's this concept. The fellow, I don't remember who wrote the book, but the fellow who wrote it, he basically says, look, if you're choosing a brand for your business, it should tell the whole story so that someone who hears of your brand knows exactly what they're going to get from you. Now, that is a little contrary to the recommendation we make when we start talking about trademarks, because trademarks have to be distinctive. So purely descriptive isn't going to do the job. But here, the podcast lawyer, I think it really does capture the imagination, tells you what you need to know, and it does some of the selling for me. So I love it.
I love that. So, Gordon, what kind of content do you consume on a weekly basis? Are you a kind of I'm only ever podcast guy? Are you I watch entertainment on like Netflix, Amazon,
Yeah.
whatever? Are you a YouTube person? Do you consume short form content? Are you across all mediums there? What's your content? What's your go-to?
Yeah. I'm not paying too much attention to the short form in the Instagram Reels and TikTok and those kinds of things. It's kind of entertaining from time to time, but I find that it's really just sort of bubble gum for the mind, and sometimes it has its place. But I love to read actual books, although I'm mostly on screens now on Kindles and things like that.
Mhm.
And I find myself spending a lot of time reading blog posts on the web,
Yep.
consuming other podcasts, lots of podcasts, and YouTube video where I can learn something. Usually, sometimes it's cooking, learn a new recipe. Sometimes it's how to plug things in on the computer and make a little improvement, or
Mhm.
how to make better videos, those kinds of things. I would say it's all sort of directed at incrementally improving myself and the things that I do, just for the satisfaction of those improvements.
So, what's your habit around sort of listening to podcasts? Do you do them on your way to maybe an office, or in the morning, or in the evening, lunchtime, going to winding down
Yeah,
to the afternoon?
I mostly consume podcasts while I'm driving.
Hmm.
Um, I would like to give myself more of that, but these days it's when I have the long drives. There's 1 or 2 days a week where I drive into downtown Los Angeles from where I live, and that's on the best day it's an hour drive. On worst days it's sometimes double that. So that gives me a lot of podcast consuming time, and I can listen at double speed and still get most of the substance. So I do a
Yeah.
lot of consuming that way. Yeah.
So you consume a lot of podcasts then, and it makes sense given what you've done. We've got the podcast lawyer as the nickname, the branded name. I love that. What are you seeing in the space with creatives, and are you seeing any mistakes that have currently been made in the industry by these people running podcasts?
Well, mistakes, if you have something to say, you got to get out and say it,
Hmm.
even if there's not much of an audience for it. But one mistake that I made, that I think a lot of creators make at the beginning, is they make the kind of content that they think, well, that they want, that they appreciate, and they don't think very hard about, does this help me achieve my goals?
Hmm.
And ultimately, like with any kind of, if you're in it for marketing and sales, you've got to solve a problem that your intended consumers actually have and want to solve and can afford to pay you to help solve. So you got to make your content with those kinds of goals in mind. When I created my first podcast, Entertainment Law Update, which is still going strong 15 years later,
Hmm.
um, we created a show by lawyers for other lawyers on the subject of what's going on in the field of entertainment law. So rather than telling customers and clients who we are and how we can help them and those kinds of things, we are teaching our competition, to training our competition. And it's been good because there's plenty of business to go around, and we get referrals as a consequence from our colleagues in the industry. But maybe could have done a better job of being a little more client focused on the front end of that. So that's a common mistake I think folks make.
Wow, 15 years, the same podcast.
Yeah,
That is, sorry,
April
go.
2009 is when we launched. So here we are in November of 2023. So we're actually about half a year short of 15. But yeah, we set it up. I came with that background in radio and TV production, so live radio was something I kind of knew how to do. So we do our production work, our preparation is really where we put a lot of energy in, and I have a team of young lawyers and law students who help us identify the news items we're going to talk about, prepare summaries for that, and then my co-host and I get together and work from those summaries, and we finish the recording, and I would say 15 minutes later the show goes live on the servers. So no post-production.
That's a real testament to your commitment and consistency. And over 15 years, I'm sure you would have noticed some incredibly different trends through the creative and entertainment space. With the longevity that you've been running this podcast, What's the biggest lesson that you've learned through that? Is outside of what we mentioned before with, you know, show up with an intent of teaching an ideal customer something so you can sell them something. What is something that sticks out to you across those 15 years?
Well, I'll say the biggest tip I can give is create systems for yourself that make it easy to show up and do it over and over, do it right from episode to episode. So it isn't a bit of pulling teeth. So, sometimes that's just a matter of having the microphone already hooked up and ready to go. So when the spirit catches you or when it's time to make that episode, you don't have to spend an hour setting up your gear.
Mm-hmm.
Having systems in place for how we create the outlines that we work from and the plan of action that we use. It's a process. Having those processes really makes the consistency easier, and that's huge. But showing up and being consistent is what the audience sees, and that, look, you want them to trust you. You want them to know, I'm going to be here with information you can count on. We do a monthly show, so every month,
Mm-hmm.
first Wednesday of the month, bang, we're going to have you a new show, and that seems to really make a difference for people.
And what kind of risks do you reckon you're seeing new podcasters or new podcasters and creators taking when they first start sharing their message in the space that could easily be avoided?
Well, as a lawyer, I am always looking at the risks that creators are addressing, and somewhat genre dependent, depending on the kind of show you do. But if you're talking about other people, you might say something that hurts their reputation, and you might have a libel suit on your hands, or you invade somebody's privacy by revealing something that they don't want the public to know, or you are talking to, this is the one that comes up often, is you've got a guest on your show, and the guest is talking about their life experience, and in the course of it, they mention their ex-husband or their ex-wife who and then somewhere else they're talking about it, and I'm a victim of domestic violence or something like that. Now the audience has got this picture that ex-husband is a spousal abuser or something like that, and that may not have, anyway. So those are the kinds of things that we need to be thoughtful about. When you're recording people, you need consent. And yes, there's an implicit consent by showing up to be recorded on the microphone, but what are you going to do with that content? Where's it going to go? Am I going to get a chance to tell you what to edit out or take it down altogether? All of those kind of things. So I would say my big crusade is for podcasters that are, and any kind of media creators that are having guests on their programs. You want to have a release, a written document with your guest that outlines who owns it and what to get to do with it, and that nobody, you're not getting paid and those kinds of things. So there can never be any finger pointing later on.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to the other thing, like the sponsorship side of things. Say an influencer or creative person is advocating for something on a show, they have an ad that obviously getting paid to run that sponsorship. They have to declare that they're getting paid for that sort of sponsorship. Is that legal?
Yeah, this is an interesting area, and it's going to vary from country to country.
Yeah.
Here in the U.S., we've got the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, that regulates influencer advertising and endorsements and those kinds of things. And yeah, it requires, and this is why you've probably seen #ad or sponsored or something like that. That is, I think the audience has a right to know that you, the influencer, are saying what you're saying because you're going to get paid. And you may be very genuine and you really love the product, but if they know you're getting paid, they take it on differently than if it's just a heartfelt recommendation of something I really like. And so that's why they have a right to know. The area that I think is most fraught right now in this is there is a category of podcasts where the guests pay the hosts for exposure on their show. Well, if you are getting paid to have that guest on, you might be a little less discerning about which guests you choose. It's not someone you had on because they're such a great fit for your audience. You're having them on because they're going to pay you to get their message across. And they very rarely do these podcasters make a disclosure that they're being paid by the guest. So I feel that's really critical, this pay to play kind of arena.
It gets me ticking because I know there's a form of content creation called user generated content in the space, right? And it's not like someone's putting their name to the video. They're not saying, hi, my name is Jake Pearson and I really like this product. they're just acting as like almost like a paid actor.
Yeah.
They're creating a video, whether it's authentic or scripted by the company, and then they're giving it to the company to run that as an ad. If there's no if they're not using their social pull or their own their name, is that still the same as, well, I'm advocating for this brand anyway because my likeness, my face is appearing in this video?
Well, if they're not running it on their own channels, if they're
Yeah.
giving the content to the brand
Mhm.
and the brand is using it on its channels, then I think people who follow that brand are going to recognize this is
Yeah.
advertising. This is,
Okay.
I think when it's crossing over, when it's on the feed that I sponsor, my subscribers are seeing it. That's a different story. And I think they have a right to know that there's money changing hands.
Yeah, and no, that makes a lot more sense. So, in terms of let's go back to the podcasting or being
Sure.
a guest. Is there any good practice for appearing on another platform legally? Should you be signing a document like a release form that entitles, "Hey, I allow you to use my name, image, and likeness." However, I don't know the words to say it
Yeah.
properly, but
In
you get what I'm
perpetuity,
saying. Yes.
irrevocable. There's a lot of those words that we lawyers throw around. Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm like I said, it's my crusade. Every guest on a show should sign a release. The
Mhm.
podcaster is the one who should present them with that agreement to sign. And I make it very easy. I've got a free podcast guest release that you can download. Go to podcastrelease.com, and it's US tailored. So if you're not in the US, you may want to pull out the language about specific to US copyright law. But
Mhm.
basically, that template should work. And what a lot of folks do is they build it into the booking mechanism. So if you're going to go to a calendar link to select a day and time to do the recording session, you can have it, present, here's the text of this agreement. Do you agree? Check yes and type your name or whatever kind of digital manifestation of agreement you can get. And that is, that's the way to do it. You want the clarity. You want the specificity of the terms being laid out.
Mm. I know in a podcast that I have previously run, I've had a guest just refuse to flat out sign anything and said I was forcing them to jump through too many hoops. And I was like, I just want you to sign the document so I can use the video
Yeah.
on social media and not have you come back and get upset about me for some reason. And we never did have that show. I'm sure that it will weed out people like that who don't want to be a part of what you're creating.
It does. I think there are some circumstances where, especially with celebrities or public figures who are always out in the public eye, and they're not accustomed to signing off on those kinds of things. It may be okay not to have that written document if they're someone who regularly gives interviews and you can point to, well, you knew what you were getting into, those kinds of things. I think it's not unreasonable to take a pass on that, but I think for most people, it's best to get it in writing.
Yeah. And so if you don't always have to get it in writing, if it can be pointed to, but anyway, we can move past that sort of what are some simple practices then, every creator who finds himself either in a partnership with another brand or person do outside of that to protect themselves? Is it just as simple as sign the document, make sure you understand what you're signing, and if you don't have someone who's qualified to understand that, read that for you?
Yeah, I think that really is the right approach. The problems that arise, legal problems, business problems, mostly arise because one or both of the parties they're not on the same page with an understanding of things. And so communication is the answer. And I think the best way to communicate is to put something down on paper and ask them to, agree or not, and then have a conversation if there's no agreement. But ultimately, getting it in writing, that goes for sponsors, it goes for partners and co-producers and co-hosts. There's questions about who owns the content. When two people work together on something, it's jointly owned, but maybe that's not what you intend. So you've got to talk it out and get it in writing. And the good news is contracts can often change the outcome of those normal, sort of the default rules. And that's why we want to try to get things in writing.
So I've got a scenario I want to pitch to you, and it probably we've already covered it, but I just wanted to reword it in a different way. Let's say a creator is doing a brand deal with their favorite brand of all time. They're so excited, and the brand representative, whoever the brand manager is, asks them, let's say, Jake, do you agree to the terms that I've outlined in this contract? And this is via email. And I type back, I agree, hit send. Is that written? Is that enough to say that over email that I've consented to the terms of the contract and that I've insinuated that I've read them?
Great question. It can be. If the email or the chain of email is enough to show all of the necessary terms in the contract. Contract isn't binding unless it has certain essential terms, the who, the what, the where, the how, the why. And if all those terms are covered in the email and one person says, yes, I agree, then yeah, you have a contract. It's not a formal written contract with wet ink on the signature line, but it is a contract.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And email is great actually for that, better than just an oral handshake.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I've seen a lot of creators in creator groups across Facebook, all different platforms, talking about contracts. Should I have a contract? Is a verbal agreement enough, or written agreement via email enough? And that kind of will hopefully answer some questions for some of the creators and the other side of the fence, the brand managers and professionals listening to the show as well. But Gordon, if you could wave a magic wand and help your clients be smarter about the work that they do so they can achieve their goals more like effectively and a lot easier, what would that magic actually do?
I think the magic wand would be education. It would educate people more on some of these risks and some of the basic rules and laws that apply so they can spot the issues before they become issues.
Mm. And your podcast, the one what was the name again? Sorry, the fifth that you do monthly?
Entertainment Law Update is the monthly show. I have another show that I'll tell you about too, but that's the one. Yeah.
That's all right. I'm just thinking for creators and people who are creatives that do interviews, that work with brands, would the information that you talk about there be very applicable and useful for them to listen to, or is that not the sort of intended audience?
Well, when I was saying we made that sort of tactical mistake about creating a show that's targeted for other lawyers, we're talking at a fairly high legal education level. We're talking about principles that some lay people will certainly understand, but some won't. So I don't think our show is particularly exciting or interesting for the average creative person. But that's why I do the other show that I was going to tell you about. It's called Legit Podcast Pro, and I do it as a video live stream where, it's really audio first. I'm making an audio recording, but I let the viewers watch and see what I'm doing. And so you can find that on YouTube. You can find that on most podcast listening tools too. Legit Podcast Pro, and that's a weekly show that I do, about 10 minutes long.
Yeah, sweet. And the reason I was just asking was because you mentioned education.
Yeah.
And if you could give that to other people, that would help empower them. And I thought, well, what education resources are out there for the average person creator who is just working on maybe a little hobby project and they don't know if they need to protect, how to protect themselves the best way, and they might not be able to afford professional help. And I thought, if you have another a resource, which is awesome, so go check out that podcast with Gordon, and that's really exciting. Now, for 30 years, you've been doing this. As we sort of get close to tying out this episode, and hasn't even been close to 30 minutes yet, so that's a lot of time to be in the entertainment sort of media space. What matters the most when it comes to creating quality content?
What matters the most when it comes to creating quality content, I would say, would be being deliberate, intentionality about what you're doing. A lot of creators, I think, just create sort of willy-nilly for the sake of creation because they've got the itch. And that's great. But being a little more deliberate, being a little more focused on what you're doing and why you're doing it will make a big difference in the quality of your output. So it's great to be consistent. It's great to have a show or something that you do every week or every month or whatever. But if it's not good, nobody's going to care. So being thoughtful, mindful about what you're doing and why and for whom, I think makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to the ask yourself why. Yeah. What is the intention behind this show? And I've run multiple podcasts now, and this is, I think, my third show that I'm hosting. My previous show, What Makes You Happy, I was only doing it to sort of speak to other people and ask what made them happy. There wasn't outside of that. The intention wasn't to grow it into something ridiculously huge or to make me any money. Maybe outside of potentially turning into a free book, a book or something. I don't even know how, but there was a different intention to the previous podcast, which was a health and fitness podcast, which was to sign fitness-based clients in my online fitness business at the time. So there's a different intention between the two, if I could give that example to those listening. But the last question I have before we tie this out, now this will be very relevant to a lot of creators who may be struggling because they're thinking about giving up versus giving up entirely. Is there a time where you should instead think, well, how can I pivot directions to take my content in the area that aligns most with me? And have you ever had to pivot your content or anything you've done outside of the legal side of things into that direction, a different direction? Sorry.
That's a terrific question. Part of me feels like the pivot should be something that's happening in micro increments all the time. You need to be paying attention to your market. You need to be paying attention to your customers, your clients, your audience, and what it is that they are worried about, struggling with, wondering, those kinds of things, and give them responses. And if I mostly talk to podcasters on Legit Podcast Pro, but if I see that there are YouTubers out there who are having similar kinds of issues, I'll try to sort of bring them into the fold with my messaging, because I know that YouTubers watch YouTube, so they'll find me. That said, you don't want to turn so fast or so far that you're now turning your back on the supporters you already have. So that's why I say micro incremental kind of pivoting. And then there's another part of me that says, once you've sort of chosen the lane you're going to get into and the track you're going down, you owe it to yourself and your customers, your clients, everybody that you're doing this for, to stay there and squeeze every last bit of your juice and energy out of yourself and deliver it in that lane. Give them the most you can before you start adding other channels. Now, pivoting is a little different, but one of the things that I think a lot of creative folks and a lot of entrepreneurs do, there's the shiny object syndrome. They go for the next thing before they're finished with the previous thing, and then they neglect the previous thing, and it sort of withers on the vine, and then the next one, and you never really get the momentum and keep it going until you've got the most out of it. So I have a coach that I talk to that talks about, if you're trying to get from an island offshore back to land, you build a bridge, right? And you build the bridge and you get there, you finish the one bridge before you start building the next one. You could have 6 unbuilt bridges if you're not careful. So build the bridge, finish making the bridge, and then if there's a better way, then make a better bridge. But you have to finish what you start. And so that's one part of it. The other thing I'll say, though, is sometimes it really is time to quit, and you have to know. But I think it's usually later than people think. And so a lot of folks, I think, quit too soon, right on the cusp of big success, or that moment when the tipping point is inches away. Oh, it's too hard. I'm so tired. I've been at this for 2 or 3 or 5 years or whatever. It's time to get serious and get a real job, or whatever they say to themselves. And unfortunately, unfortunately, they give up a little too soon, and they may feel a little unfulfilled or whatever. That being said, sometimes quitting is the right answer, because you can devote your energies to other things and start building that other bridge. So
it's almost like balancing, really understanding what your intentions are, balancing your expectations, making sure you've got something left to give. It's not as, because I've experienced this quite similarly in many different points, and I'm like, is this the right laneway for me? Is this really the direction that gets me excited? And it started here, then it changed, the goalpost changed with some micro pivots, and then a few more micro pivots later, and all of a sudden I was like, maybe I had to experience all this to realize that this wasn't the thing that I was really meant for, or that really lights my soul on fire. So I can see a lot of creators have gone down that path where they start talking about one topic and they do a bunch of different content around it, and then they quickly realize this isn't the thing that actually excites me. It's this thing. But you've also got to be able to be reflective and recognize, are you chasing just another shiny object that's super exciting in the short term, or is it something that you really are drawn to? And I would encourage all creators, creative people, anyone listening to this show right now with Gordon and I, really ask yourself these questions when you think of making a big shift. Is it because you're chasing something that's new and exciting, and there might be some new opportunity and you think that that is the right thing to do? Or is it something that you really feel like it's time for you to do, or something that you wanted to do for a long time? It's as much personal development and asking yourself these hard questions as it is just making the decision.
Yeah, with some of my coaching clients, I do an exercise. I call it the 7-layer dip, where I ask the question, why? Why do you do what you do? And then when they give me an answer, I'll ask, well, why do you do? Why is that the case? And then keep digging why until you get to the real reason. And a lot of times people haven't even really been honest with themselves about that real reason or that real motivation for maybe not doing the things they should be doing. So it's a really good exercise to dig into. And I think, when you find that if you're doing something with a purpose of service, that is the kind of thing that has the potential to light you up. When you're doing it just to make money, why do you go to work every day? Well, I got to put food on the table. I've got to keep the rent paid. Yeah, that's not a great reason to have a particular career. Some people work to live, but most of us, we want to find work that fulfills and serves our need to play our role in society and in the culture. And so it's important to be asking those kinds of questions from time to time, and not being afraid of the answers. That's the other thing. You got to be fearless.
I think we'll leave it with that. Gordon, thank you so much for sharing your insights into the creator landscape, all things, law and undue risk, and how to avoid risk and how to protect yourself in the creative space. I've definitely learned a lot, and I hope that the creators and the creative professionals have also taken a bunch of way. Where can people connect with you to listen to your shows? Do you have like a one website that people can just click on and go follow everything there?
As I think about it now, I don't think I have one website, but the main clearinghouse for my stuff is GordonFiremark.com. So that's pretty easy. It's GordonFiremark, just like it sounds. GordonFiremark.com. And you can always find me on social media, GFiremark, on YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn and those kinds of places. And most of what I'm doing is visible there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Gordon. Really appreciate your time today.
Jake, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun. I'm grateful.
Thank you.